Hello and welcome to my channel. Today is the fifth perspective of a series of videos that I'm making. The third perspective was Keegan, and today we're going to talk to his wife, Charlie, who is a stay-at-home mom, so she can give a different perspective than we've had before. And this series of videos is about a perspective to look at how the universe works from different stereoscopic perspectives. And since humans are one of those perspectives, having different people on is kind of the universe figuring itself out. So multiple perspectives of this video is in itself what the video is about. The only request by Charlie was that I use the most simplest terms possible. So this one I'm going to try to say simple words, not get into any scientific jargon or nomenclature, and I'm gonna try to explain things at the simplest way that I can. So to start off, we're just gonna look at the introductory slide. You have binary information. That's the simplest way you can encode information to describe patterns. So you can think of the zeros as no energy or no matter being there, and the ones as energy or matter being there. However, it's not like if you zoom into the tiniest points of space in the universe, I'm not trying to say there's zeros and ones there. I'm just trying to say this is a way to encode the information. And then you have different perspectives of that information, just like your left and right eye superimpose an image to create image with depth. So you can have multiple perspectives coming together to create one image, and the differences in those perspectives are called disparity. And that disparity can create geometry. That geometry creates space-time. So that's how you can get simple connections to create three-dimensional geometry, which can emerge as space-time. And Einstein proved about 100 years ago that what we think of as gravity is really the fabric of space-time, and how all the different matter and energy that's in the universe connect, so their collective interactions are what creates space-time, which we perceive as gravity. And all of the matter that is held within that fabric, all the matter and the structure in the universe, the sun and the planets and all the other stars and the galaxies and solar systems that exist, are also places where things like life and consciousness can emerge in that same fabric. And looking at it all together, you have many different perspectives, from something as small as an electron to single cells and organelles to us, and maybe even something that's bigger than us. Like they say, the Gaia hypothesis describes the Earth working as one organism, and maybe there's even a higher intelligence beyond Earth. So this is just an introductory slide. So any thoughts or concerns, cares about this one?
No. I mean, I think I'm ready to get into it.
All right, so let's continue to the next slide. So this is the first time I have this slide in these perspective videos, because I got a lot of questions from people on the channel and outside the channel about if I'm trying to talk about religion or spirituality, or if I'm an atheist, what do I believe? And I think that that's two different questions. That this whole presentation is about how the universe works and intuitive ways to think about science, from quantum particles to Einstein's theory of space-time to single cells and organelles, and how those molecules come together to form biomolecular condensates. That's all how the universe works. So that's the how question right here, using science and mathematics. And then talking about spirituality or religious beliefs or how the whole universe works. That's asking why. Why does the universe work the way it does? And you would see that atheists might say it's just all random. Spiritual individuals might say that there's a higher power or the intelligence of the whole universe, and religious belief is that there's a God that can go make, changes as they wish in the universe. However, all of these different belief systems are asking the same question of why does the universe work as it does. So I think that both of these questions can complement each other. The how the universe works, which we'll be talking about in this video, and depending on your own individual perspective, you will have a different answer to why the universe is working like it does. So, any thoughts, cares, or concerns on this slide? And I would put myself somewhere in between spiritual and religious. So, if you would like to elaborate where you find yourself, that would be
No,
that would be cool.
no, I definitely would say that I'm spiritual. And I do believe to a certain extent that, we create our own reality for ourselves and that, there's just so much magic in this universe.
Right.
And the law of attraction personally is something that I kind of like to live by. But no, yeah, I like how you're kind of like differentiating the how and the why and how these are two different things, and you're kind of mainly covering the how, right, with
Right.
this presentation. But it does kind of dabble into also the why a little bit.
So, can you just elaborate on the law with how you define the law of attraction?
Sure. Yeah. So essentially, we all come from the same cells. We all share the same origin, and we're all connected in that way. Sorry, that was a little distracting. Sorry, that really threw me off.
No,
Okay.
that's all right. She
And
has a baby in the background that's just
okay.
being a little loud, but it's all right.
Okay. So yes, so we're all connected, and I believe that we are all experiencing, our different realities from our own perspectives of life, and we do find meaning in it through various through various different ways. I'm so sorry. I'm so distracted at this moment.
All
Oh
right,
my
it's okay.
gosh.
So
I had a feeling this might happen.
I think what she's saying is that everybody's unique perspective is going to lead them to think, you know, somewhere on the spectrum between atheism, spirituality, and religious beliefs. And due to our different perspectives, even though how the universe works remains the same, we'll find ourselves in different places along this spectrum. So when you say the law of attraction, you're basically talking about how your perspectives and kind of, attracts certain things in your own consciousness that you believe to be true.
Yes.
And that your own imagination and the things that you choose to believe will kind of attract certain things into your life and determine your future path. So that's kind of what you're talking about when you mention the law of attraction.
Yes, exactly. It's kind of like where you put your energy and you focus your attention to is what you attract, basically.
All right.
And that can get very tricky sometimes because people are like, oh, well, then who would attract something negative, or who would want something terrible or bad to happen? And I don't have an answer to everything, but I do believe it's like it's kind of like a wave, like I can't be on the highest frequency constantly or the lowest frequency constantly and attract, all of the best amazing, things there are to have in life. Uh, because life is it's dual, like one thing can't exist without another, so it can't all be amazing and positive and love all the time. But sorry, that got a little sidetracked.
Right. The tough times make the good times in
Exactly.
life a little bit better in
one
a way.
one can't exist without the other, essentially.
Right. The yin and the yang, which is the symbol for my channel. So we'll continue, but I just wanted to give this slide because I did get questions about, if I'm trying to say by this presentation that God exists or the whole universe is conscious, or that it's all just random because of the random fluctuations. And I'm not saying any of that in this presentation, because this presentation is an intuitive way to think about how the universe works. However, everybody is going to have their own interpretation of why it works like it does. But it's up to us and our perspectives to find our own meaning and our own answers as to why we're here and why the universe is like it is. So let's continue on to the scientific portions of this video, and we'll talk about the classical versus the quantum view. So the classical view is deterministic, and it's Einstein's theory of relativity that explains the fabric of space-time and explains how the planets orbit the sun. So it's a continuous mathematical framework to think of everything, whereas the quantum view is not continuous. It tries to break everything down into its bits and pieces, so it quantizes everything to the tiniest particles possible. So you have different different ways of understanding these interactions, where classical physics makes a lot more sense to us because it's what our brains evolved to understand. Like if a rock is thrown at us, we're we've evolved to understand that because it's important for our survival. However, an electron or a photon having wave particle duality and acting as a wave, that's really not important for our survival. And that leads, since it acts like a wave, it can have quantum superposition, it can have entanglement due to the uncertainty principle. So these are a little bit more counterintuitive concepts that aren't easy for our brains to understand. And that's why Werner Heisenberg came up with the uncertainty principle, and then also has a famous quote saying that not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. But we'll try to imagine it intuitively in this video, which I hope some of these figures will help you. So any questions, concerns, or thoughts on this slide?
No, not necessarily. I think the way that you explained it um, definitely like helps differentiate between the two for me. This, like I said, I haven't been in school in like 10 years. This is very out of my wheelhouse of
All right.
knowledge. But no, n- no, it's making sense to me. And it's
All right.
good.
So we'll continue on to the intuitive way to understand the difference between the quantum and classical view. And we'll get into just a little bit of math here, but I'll just try to explain it intuitively. And then the next slide will explain quantum superposition, hopefully a little bit better. So the classical view already assumes that we understand the information that is there. For instance, that we know where a planet might be in orbit. So we already have the information. So we can just simply add them together, and we get wave one and wave two added together. And that's, if we square it, the square of it'll be equal to the square of sums. Wave one and plus wave two squared will directly correlate to the square of sums. So that's just a mathematical way to prove that you understand what's happening to all the information. However, in quantum, the quantum view is that you really don't know. You don't understand all the information that is there. That's why they have the famous Schrodinger's cat analogy for it, where you don't know if the cat is dead or alive until you open the box. So we have to account for the fact that we don't know everything when we're trying to understand and calculate quantum interactions. And the way we do that is by squaring wave one and wave two. So whenever we square it, we are trying to account for all the possibilities that could occur. So we don't know wave one and wave two. We're not certain of it, so we're trying to account for all the possibilities in a probabilistic way using probability. So we square it and we get wave one and wave two squared, and we add those two squares together, and that gives us, you can think about it as almost an entangled state or a superposition of wave one and wave two squared combined. And the sum of squares in this case does not equal the square of sums, like wave one plus wave two squared equals the square of sums. So, and that's why quantum mechanics is different, because you end up having a correlation or a superimposed of all the probabilities, all the possible paths that could occur in wave one and wave two. You end up getting a superimposed sum of squares. And that's just a way for the universe to incorporate all the quantum interactions in the most efficient way possible. So, any thoughts or concerns on this slide?
No, not necessarily. This is no. I like how you explained that quantum. It cannot. It cannot be. You don't know, right? Like you were saying about wave one and wave two. How we know this to be true, right?
Right, in the classical view.
So it's quantifiable, right? But we don't know with quantum. Um, so that's making sense to me.
Yeah, so classical, you can directly quantify it and be certain, as you said. And then the quantum view is probabilistic because you're just trying to understand the probability of things happening. So that, and that leaves room for emergence, for new things to emerge. So how do things emerge from this correlation? And that leads us to our next slide. You can think of the left channel and the right channel as wave one and wave two, or you can think of it as our left eye and our right eye, or you can think of it as an electron or photon combining with another electron or photon. But it's basically stereoscopic channels that are superimposed together so that you get a correlation of both information combined. So that is a way where you can have two-dimensional information, and when you superimpose them together, it creates three-dimensional information that's encoded. So this is a good way to think of just your vision and how your left and right eye make a superimposed image to help you see depth through disparity. But it's also a good way to think of quantum superposition or quantum entanglement, because whenever you have a superposition of two different particles, like the left and the right channel, they're both correlated together. So this superimposed image would be the superposition of both particles combined. Or if you have two particles entangled together, you can think of the entanglement as the superimposed image. And right now in science, they're having all kind of different theories to try to figure out how information is getting transferred from one particle to the next so fast when you have two particles entangled together. And if you hold them far away from each other and you interact with one particle, somehow that entanglement state changes instantaneously. But it's not that information is moving instantaneously and faster than the speed of light. It's that the correlated information that accounts for the entanglement is changed when you interact with one particle. So if you erased a portion of either the left channel or the right channel, if you erased any of it and just made it all white or all black, then that would change the superimposed image that's created. So it's not that information is moving to the other channel instantaneously. It's just that the correlation or the superimposed image made is instantly changing whenever you make a change to either particle or either channel. however way you want to look at it. So is this a intuitive way to think about entanglement or superposition?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for kind of dumbing it down for me. No, no, no. So question, is superimposed and entanglement they're the same thing or
Well, I think that a better it's not like a superimposed image is the perfect way to explain entanglement, but it is a very useful way for humans to understand visually what entanglement is. So, in my opinion, this is the best way for humans to intuitively understand
I
it,
see, I see. Okay,
to
yeah.
understand the concept of what's going on. That it's not simply just the adding both together, it's the correlation of both together so that you have something emerging.
Mm-hmm. I see.
You have something new that emerges.
Yeah, I see.
All right. So now let's just go over everything that we've discussed so far. You have binary information. You can have different perspectives of that binary information that you can describe by left and right stereoscopic channels. The different perspectives create differences that are disparity signals. So the differences are is the disparity. And those differences or disparity can create geometry, which we can see the disparity between the left image and the right image. When you combine them, create a three-dimensional image. So that's how you can have geometry that's created from this disparity. And you can imagine that's how space-time emerges from these little bitty quantum interactions, all the different interactions and how they combine together can create these emergent patterns that we call space-time. So that means space-time isn't really fundamental. It just emerges from these quantum interactions and these entangled states between particles that create geometry. And all of the emergent space-time is what we call gravity and what we experience as. So reality in itself is emergent, and gravity is one of those emergent aspects that rises out of the quantum interactions. So any concerns or thoughts on this slide? This is just kind of going over what we've already talked about.
Yeah. So, essentially, what we're talking about is how particles interacting with each other, essentially creates our reality, right?
Right. And we'll, in future slides, we'll get into how you can use this framework to understand the differences in time and how time is relative in different parts of the universe so that it'll be a useful framework when trying to understand the reality that's created by this mechanism. So let's move on to quantum fluctuations. So even if you have totally empty space, you can think that all this information is still coming together and trying to find better ways to combine in new perspectives. And that's constantly creating quantum fluctuations, even in the vacuum of space, even in the middle of two galaxies where you barely have even a single atom, you'll still have quantum fluctuations that are connecting everything together. And we know this is happening not only mathematically from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle or Schrodinger's cat, for example. So those are theoretical models, but also from the Casimir effect, where you can create a vacuum and measure the energy in between two plates in that vacuum, so you know you're having quantum fluctuations that are occurring. So this is just a way to understand that even empty space is still trying to reorganize and it's connecting everything together through these quantum fluctuations. So any thoughts or concerns on this slide?
Really just I think one question. So quantum fluctuations. Is that particles interacting? Or what is quantum fluctuations exactly? What does that mean?
Yeah, you can think of it as particles interacting and popping in and out of existence, but on a scale that is unobservable to us, like very, very tiny scales. But the way in which they're popping in and out of existence to interact with itself in a way is what combines all the space and all the other interactions together. So
Okay.
it's just that those fluctuations is what is almost like the base fabric for space time that connects everything together. A way you can think about
Yeah,
it.
I see. Would that relate with the Big Bang?
So the Big Bang, there are ideas, especially from Roger Penrose, that at the end of the universe, you can think about whenever everything has spread out to its maximum, that all you might have are these quantum fluctuations. So then, if you think about that, then scale and size don't really matter, don't really mean anything. If all you have is an infinite amount of these quantum fluctuations. So then if scale doesn't matter anymore, then one of these quantum fluctuations could be the start of a big bang at the end of this universe. Because that would just be, even though you would think of it as tiny, one quantum fluctuation may contain, all of the information needed to start a whole nother universe. But again, that's just a theoretical model by Roger Penrose, that at the end of the universe, when all you have left are quantum fluctuations, so scale doesn't really matter anymore, and out of one of those quantum fluctuations, you could get the seed of a new universe.
Awesome.
All right, so let's move to the next slide. So now this slide just goes over why waves are useful. So you have quantum mechanics that uses waves in order to describe how information is transferred. For instance, in photons, electrons, and phonons, which is a collection of particles or atoms oscillating together. All of these different things have wave properties. And waves are useful because whenever waves combine, they create interference patterns, which is a way to have emergent properties, because these interference patterns will create an emergent structure that aren't totally defined by either wave. So this slide is just showing you why waves are useful and used in quantum mechanics. Any thoughts
Hmm.
or concerns or cares?
No, so this is just kind of like a tool to help understand like everything that we're discussing, right?
Right, the quantum interactions that we're talking about, wave mechanics just helps us understand it and, do theories and math on it to make predictions. But it's essentially the same way water waves come together and two tall waves will meet and create an even larger wave, or a small wave and a large wave will create something in the middle because they'll cancel each other out. It's just wave mechanics, the same that you would see in the ocean, having interference patterns that is also used in quantum mechanics.
Okay. Can you explain to me like how are waves and particles related? Like I'm looking at this right here. They're not the same thing, right?
Right.
Just like
So you can think that waves are really the best way to understand quantum interactions. And when people are trying to explain a particle, it's just when you have one of those waves localized on one part of the field that it's in. So all quantum interactions can be explained by quantum fields. So you can think of it as a three-dimensional field and a wave going through that field. And then whenever they talk about a particle, it's just when the wave concentrates into just one little part of that field. So that particle is actually just the highest point of the wave, or the highest, yeah, the highest excitation on that field.
Okay.
So that's a way you can think about the difference between a particle and a wave.
Waves would explain how particles move.
Right.
Okay.
If a particle is moving through the field,
Yes.
it has wave-like properties.
Okay.
Alrighty. So then how do those waves come together to create reality? Whenever you have a lot of waves that are combining together, you can have networks that form and create different outcomes in the universe. So you can think about this as decisions being made whenever you have quantum interactions coming together, you have an interference pattern and you have a new emergent structure that forms. So that's almost like decisions being made in the universe. So you can think about the decisions that were made in our universe in the past were the development of atoms. So we don't really have a choice to change that. We're made out of atoms. But there are still choices to be made, and there are still emergent patterns yet to be formed. So we do have choices that we can still make, but we are stuck with some of the choices that have already been determined by our universe, like we're made of atoms and molecules and certain particles. So it's just a network of interactions describing how everything is combined together. So any thoughts or concerns about this one?
Sorry, I'm taking it all in.
No, it's all right.
So, no, I don't necessarily think I have any like questions per se. This is kind of just breaking down.
How reality unfolds from all of those quantum possibilities.
Let me see.
So how the mechanism of emergence, but we'll get into mechanism more in the next slide, to percolation
Yeah.
theory, if you would like to.
Yes, yes.
So what's the mechanism that decides which outcomes do occur in the universe? And that brings us to percolation theory, how possibility becomes reality. So you have all of these different wave probabilities that are coming together, and you can think of how they come together in a similar way that bubbles in a coffee pot percolate up, or how a forest fire forms in a forest. Both of those different scenarios follow percolation theory, where you just have a few bubbles that form in a coffee pot, but as more bubbles form and percolate up, they connect with other bubbles until the whole coffee pot is filled with bubbles, like you see here. You can compare it to a forest fire, where you just have a few fires in the forest, tiny little fires, and as those fires get bigger and combine together, they eventually create a whole forest fire where the whole forest is ignited in flames. So this follows criticality, where you just have a few connections happening, and once those connections pass a critical threshold, then quickly more connections will be made until it's functioning as a whole system, and the whole system has properties that the individual pieces that came together don't. So that's a new emergent structure evolves. And this can also be used to understand how biology evolves. It can be used to understand the accretion of asteroids and stuff to create planets and stars, and how galaxies come together to form the cosmic web, a network. So this is just a theory to explain how emergent patterns form by little bitty pieces coming together one part at a time until you have so many pieces that have come together that you have new properties that those individual pieces don't have. So any
No, this makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's very interesting because I feel like there's a lot of instances in life where we see something like this, like baking. You know, you're putting all of these different ingredients together, and at one point, after you put enough together, it becomes a completely new thing, right? I know that's a far comparison, but
Yeah, well, even in cooking, cooking follows percolation theory as well. Whenever you're cooking like a gumbo or something, and you have all these different components that you need to come together, and you have little oil droplets that are percolating in the system and combining different spices together to get that perfect taste. So it's using some of the same emergent patterns that we think about in the universe and how biology forms through liquid phase separation. It's all following some of the same organizational principles.
no, I like how you explained this. This was really helpful.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So you can think about the networks that form from percolation, whether it be the network of bubbles that I described, the network of different oil droplets when you're cooking, the network of forest fires that are combining together, or the network of quantum particles that are all combining together to create all the different structures of matter in the universe, from black holes to planets to stars to galaxies. They all form by a similar network pattern, which creates an emergent space-time. So this fabric that we call space-time can be defined by how all of these tiny interactions are combining together. So the fabric is described by the relationships that everything has with one another, even down to the tiniest scales to the biggest scales like black holes and galaxies. So all this slide is trying to show is that all of these interactions can create a fabric that everything exists in. And in the next few slides, we'll explain the nature and dynamics and function of this fabric that is formed. So any cares or concerns about this slide?
No, I'm ready to kind of get into it a little bit more. You said that the next slides will kind of delve a
Right.
little deeper.
So this slide is just showing that all of these interactions will create different geometry of the fabric, and all the particles exist in that geometry. So then you have the Hilbert space entanglement and information. So the Hilbert space just describes all the different ways that this geometry can form together. It's what's used to understand quantum interactions. And then all of those interactions, whenever they combine together, they combine through entanglement, and that entanglement is what creates different geometries in the universe. So that's a physics, kind of a science way to think about it, but a way you can think about this from your interpretation of the law of attraction and also a human perspective is you can think about the Hilbert space as your imagination. The entanglement is how your imagination is entangled to reality. and then how your consciousness chooses to connect your imagination to reality will drastically dictate the future of reality that you create for yourself. So that's kind of what you're saying with your law of attraction, is that whatever you choose to imagine in your head has a chance that reality has a chance of attracting itself to you in the future, because you're choosing to connect your imagination to reality that's having an impact on your whole brain, your consciousness, and your subconscious. So all of your functioning in society and how you live and what you choose to do will be attracting those ideas to your path and will change your future. So, do you have any thoughts on or concerns about this slide?
I really liked how you explained that and you gave examples. That definitely helps to kind of for me to understand like how these three are connected. Oh, I mean that I really liked that. It was really good. Sorry, I'm just reading this really good presentation.
So, does that give you a good idea of the mechanism a little bit more for the law of attraction, and how your imagination can have a direct impact on your future and attracting those things you choose to think about?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it also goes to show because, like you said, there's so many possibilities, right? Like when it comes to manifestation, like how you can manifest good and bad and neutral, right?
Right.
And that's really the key to it is like, what do you focus your energy and like your attention on is what you get, what you bring back.
Right. So be aware of what you choose to imagine in your head, because it might end up coming to fruition. So let's get into how everything is connected and how we know that things are connected, even far away from us, like black holes or neutron stars or supernovas. And I also wanted to put this in here just because we are making this video in Louisiana, and we do have a laser interferometer, which is called LIGO. We have a LIGO detector in Louisiana, so I just wanted to give a shout out to them. So, whenever black holes and neutron stars or supernova happen and explode or combine in the universe, it leaves a gravitational wave, or it releases a gravitational wave, and we can detect that by LIGO detectors, which just have lasers and guided mirrors, so we can measure slight changes in the distance of those lasers. So we're detecting changes in the distances in space-time with these lasers, and it allows us to detect gravitational waves. And this is just one way that we know that you can have ripples in space-time, and we can detect things that have happened even far away, because we have multiple LIGO detectors on Earth, and when they both detect the same signal, they can triangulate that to a point in space in the universe, and we can go look there and see, oh, look, there was a black hole merger or a neutron star collision or a supernova. So they can confirm whatever they detected. So any thoughts or concerns on this slide?
So, are you? So, could you say that like this is a way that you could show like everything is connected from the ends of the universe and reality because something can't happen without something else being affected that we can measure and see and like verify, right?
Right. So since there's a direct cause and effect
Mm-hmm.
relationship, we know that there has to be some medium, which is space-time, that this is all flowing through. So we know that we are connected by space-time, and we're connected to things happening even very far away from us.
Could word connected be like used in place of entanglement or entangled? Would you say that that's
You can think of it like that. However, when two particles are entangled, it's more of a direct relationship, and their correlation is is more direct. It's like a clear superimposed correlation, where the correlation between the black holes or neutron star collision or the supernova, even though that they are sending some type of signals to us, it's not going to be as correlated because it's such a far distance as two particles directly interacting with each other.
No, that makes sense.
All right, so now let's continue to an intuitive way you can think about gravitational waves is the same way we think about waves in a crystal, which is called phonons. So you can have a wave or an oscillation in a crystal, which is just the collective vibration of many different particles or atoms in the crystal. So, in the same way, you can have a collective vibration in the crystal, you can have a collective vibration in all the particles and the fabric of space. However, it's a lot bigger when we're talking about gravitational waves. The gravitational waves are happening from light years away from us, but it's the same wave-like concept that's happening in a phonon in a crystal. So this is just an intuitive way to think about the nature of what a gravitational wave is, that it's a wave going through many different atoms or particles, and a phonon moving through a crystal is a wave that's also moving through many atoms or particles. So particles can have waves, but then many particles together can also oscillate together and also carry a wave. So any thoughts or concerns on this slide?
So there's just it's just different scale basically. Like you have, like you said, you have smaller waves or these smaller interactions happening, like on a smaller scale. Like you said, not fundamental but real, right? Not primary, but still important.
Right, just different manifestations
Mhm.
of the same principle,
Yeah.
of the same mechanism.
Was this how you were kind of explaining to me earlier with the DNA, with the mitochondria, or was that a different slide?
Yeah, we'll get to that. That
Okay.
on the first slide,
Whoops.
I mentioned that one. So
That was a good comparison. Oh, I thought that was really cool.
right, in the same way that waves have different manifestations at different scales, you can also think about perspectives, like your cells have a different perspective as we do, as different, the same thing happening at different scales, which we'll get more into in the future slides with that one. So this one is about gravitational waves mediated by disparity structures reorganizing collectively. So you have all these different disparity structures that or creating geometry and different interactions between all of these quantum particles. And this slide is just showing that whenever you have a gravitational wave moving through all of these particles and atoms, that it's kind of causing a slight reorganization of all of these quantum interactions. So it's slightly changing the disparity between all of these molecules. And molecules, atoms, particles, everything that the wave is moving through. So, any thoughts or questions on this slide?
I don't have any questions about this one. It's pretty straightforward, I feel.
All right, and that moves us to talk about something interesting, one of the interesting functions about this structure, which is how it can explain time. So you can think about the rate of change of disparity structures or quantum interactions. So how fast that changes is what we describe and what we experience as time. And we know that time can be different at different parts of the universe because of Einstein's theory of general relativity. But we also confirmed that with satellites that are orbiting the Earth, and we have to, for instance, GPS satellites, and we have to account for the increase in time, even though it's just by a split second. Those satellites are experiencing time at a little bit faster rate than we are on Earth. So we have to calculate that and calibrate that so our GPS systems are accurate. So whenever, and one way to explain it is you have more gravitational constraints on Earth. So on Earth, time is moving a little bit slower because of the changing in geometry is happening a little bit slower than it is away from Earth, like on the satellite. So therefore, time is relative. Time is relative to the space time that you exist in. So, any thoughts or concerns or questions on this slide? And I think that the next slide is also explains this
Okay.
further.
Okay. So this relates to everything that we've been talking about with the particles reacting, right? Reacting to each other and the word emerging, or there was another word we
Right.
used.
So the rate of interaction and the rate of emergence is what we call time,
I see.
and it's going to happen a little bit slower the more gravity or the more space-time curvature that those particles are interacting in.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, so to give an example, you can have two different people that traveler A in yellow and traveler B in purple. And traveler A is going through a flat region, and traveler B is going through a curved region. So traveler B is going to experience time at a slower rate since it's going through a curved region of space-time. Another way you can think about this is the time we experience is determined by, you can think of it kind of as the chemical reactions happening in our body. And those chemical reactions are determined by the oscillations of atoms in our body. So the oscillations are just kind of how the electrons go around the atoms. So one intuitive way you can think about this is whenever those atoms are going through curved space, instead of oscillating, they're having to reconfigure in new space-time. So they're putting more energy and going into that new space-time than they are in their normal oscillations. So that's why they're experiencing time at a little slower rate than we are, because they're having to put more of their energy into going into that new space than their normal oscillations, than their normal state. Where if you have atoms going through flat space, then they can still oscillate like they would normally, so that their experience of time wouldn't really change as compared to someone traveling through more curved space or a higher gravitational field. So the higher the curvature, the slower the space time, the slower the time moves. So if you're by a black hole, time is moving the slowest, and then it's moving a little faster on Earth, and then in empty space, it's moving the fastest. So any thoughts or concerns or questions on this slide?
No, I mean that's just really cool. I did not. I mean, I did not. I didn't quite realize that time is so. What's the word?
Relative.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really quite interesting, honestly. What was I about to say? Shoot, I had a thought.
Yeah, so you can imagine in different parts of the universe, and even if there's universes beyond ours, they might be experiencing time at a different rate. So it might be even more evolved than we are, and different things may have occurred based off those differences in time. So this really widens the possibilities of reality when you think about how different time can be.
I don't think I have any more questions about this stuff.
Alrighty, so let's move on to life. So now we'll talk about life and what percolation theory and all of these different perspectives have to do with cells and life on Earth. So percolation theory, remember, talked about how you can have a point of criticality where you have a new system coming together that has different functions than the individual parts that came together. So that is a good way to explain the origin of life. You had RNA and proteins that were all mixed together, and through something called liquid-liquid phase separation, these molecules started to combine together until they created a system, what's called a biomolecular condensate. And that group of molecules started to have functions and started to have signaling and be able to integrate information and respond to the environment differently than any of the individual molecules could alone. So the remarkable thing about how this happens is that it utilizes the structure of water. So we know that water has different phases. It has liquid phase, it has a solid phase that we call ice, and then it has a gas phase. So what's interesting is that the liquid phase even has more phases in itself, that the liquid phase has a structured phase and a less structured phase. So the structured phase of liquid water can be utilized to organize biomolecules so that DNA, RNA, and proteins can all organize in this structured form of water. And this process we call liquid-liquid phase separation. So we mentioned fluctuations happening in empty space. So there's also fluctuations in water happening between these structured configurations of water and the less structured, chaotic configurations of water. So those two configurations are constantly going back and forth in liquid water. And biology has a way of stabilizing the structured form so that it can form these condensates and create boundary conditions where it can start organizing biological signaling. So this is how the origin of life most likely started, and then it started incorporating different pieces of RNA, DNA, and proteins and a membrane into the different structures, and then that eventually started to combine together into different cells like bacterial cells, archaea cells, and eukaryotic cells to form all the different structures of life that we know of today. So you can think that these combinations are emergent in the fact that even in our own body, we like to think of ourselves as just one organism, but we have many different cells, not even just human cells, that are part of our body. So, yeah, we have bacteria living in our eye tract, but we also have something called the mitochondria that have its own DNA. It has circular DNA, and that's completely different from our DNA. So it's thought that 2 billion years ago, a purple bacteria started to live in a symbiotic relationship with our cells, and then that's how animal cells got all the all the energy from the mitochondria to form the different diversity of life we see today in fungus, plants, and animals. So these different symbiotic relationships that emerged is what created all the different forms of life on Earth we see today. And the reason why it could all integrate together is because you can think of it as, even though you had a new bacterial cell that was trying to live with another cell, the animal cell, it could all incorporate together because it was all these water droplets just combining together through percolation and creating new emergent structures to form differently. So any thoughts or concerns on this slide?
I think you actually just kind of answered my question. I was going to ask if this was basically like what we were talking about with percolation and how a bunch of smaller reactions eventually become enough to become its own entity. How you were talking about like us having the different DNA in the mitochondria, right? That was really my question, but you answered it like just a second ago.
Right, so the whole is greater than the sum of its parts,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, exactly.
All right, so then that brings us to a mechanism for collective organization in the universe. So it can all be described as information. And then you have information that follows organizational principles through things, through mechanisms, stereoscopic perspectives, and all these different quantum fluctuations are always creating new perspectives, which can create an emergent pattern that we call fields. And those fields have particles, and then those particles can come together and create atoms. Atoms come together and create molecules. The molecules polymerize together and create macromolecules like RNA, DNA, and proteins. Those utilize different phases of water to create biomolecular condensates. Those condensates merge together to create different cells. Those different cells come together to create organisms. Organisms create societies, and societies create civilization. And it's all following a similar collective organization, which can all be described through percolation, which creates a network of patterns, which can be described by fractal geometry. Because if you think of a network of interactions, that's basically thinking about a tree or a branching structure. So you have these patterns in the brain, in the human circulatory system, in trees, in rivers, in the cosmic web. You see these similar patterns everywhere. And all a fractal is that you have similar structures at every scale. And since you have this collective organization happening at every scale, you would expect there to be similar patterns at every scale that are continuously emerging. So, any questions or concerns on this slide?
No, I mean, it's just all a cycle, huh? Just a repeating cycle, like on a small scale up to large scale, right? Fractals are really cool too. That's something I've seen previously before. I guess I didn't realize like the depth at which it can pretty much be found in everything, right? That
Right.
exists.
At all scales.
So, I mean, yet again, maybe another example of how we're all connected.
Right, exactly. So now that starts to bring us to the closing slide, but we'll just go over the scaling of consciousness, because you can think that all of these different ways that information can be organized can create many different perspectives and many different forms of consciousness in the universe. There's different scientific papers about something as tiny as an electron, and that even single particles can be described by information and consciousness. And cells, of course, and organelles like the mitochondria can have their own perspectives and type of consciousness, humans have their own type of consciousness. And in the same way that mitochondria have their own DNA and are part of our body, and they have their own perspective and their way of computing information, but they have no sense of our goals or our consciousness. We are embedded in a universal framework, and we don't totally understand the goals or the consciousness that exists beyond us, similar to how the mitochondria don't understand the consciousness that they exist in, which is us. So it's good to be humble and realize that we might not be the greatest or the most important or the biggest consciousness that exists. And we need to recognize the smaller consciousness, the smaller in scale, that make our lives possible, like the mitochondria, and realize that we actually might be in a similar circumstance that they're in, and there might be bigger consciousness outside of our perspective.
So I like how you said it earlier to me. Pretty much like we could be the mitochondria
Right.
of another much larger like consciousness or goodness knows being whatever it is. Um, no, that was really insightful.
All right, so let's move on to the closing. So we are not separate from the universe, just as you said. We're all connected, and we are expressions of it. We are how it learns, grows, and remembers, and continues to evolve and emerge into new patterns from the little informational scales of quantum particles all the way to the cosmic scale of galaxies and the whole cosmic web. And it all has a similar organization that can be thought of as fractal organization. So anything to say about the slide?
No, this was I really like this slide. It kind of sums up everything up that we've been talking about in a little bit of simpler terms. No, I don't think I have anything new to add. Just amazing it all is, right? Wondrous, really.
Right. And, the relationships, the new relationships that form will give a greater potential of new emerging patterns to evolve in the future. Which brings me to my final slide, which is I got a lot of these ideas from The Cosmic Code, which is a book written by Heinz Pagels, and he was a theoretical physicist that loved to go on mountaineering hikes through Rocky Mountains and snow-capped mountains. And these are just two pictures of a trip that me and my wife went on in the Rocky Mountains up to Sky Pond that you can see right here. And I just wanted to put this not only to give reference to where I got some of these ideas from, but also to explain that it's important to really express your imagination as much as possible and to be fearless in doing so, because you never know what connection you can make with people and how those connections, interactions, and relationships will have a drastic change on what can evolve into the future. So that's what I would like to end
Mm-hmm.
on. And what are your final thoughts?
Mm-hmm. No, I really like how you said that. So basically, like, it's just a really good. It's really important to remember that you should put yourself out there, do new things, right? Just experience new things and don't be afraid to be different from other people, right? Because all we are doing is creating new ideas, new relationships, new realities basically. Like the more you get out and you do things and you be yourself and don't worry about trying to be like other people because we're not all meant to be the same, you know? I think it's a really good reminder of like why we're here, and it's to, like you said, express ourselves and be our true, genuine selves, and magic will come from it. You know, things we can't even imagine
Right,
will come from it.
exactly. Well, I appreciate you doing this video with me. And now I'm sure Finley is begging for you to get back to him.
Thank you for
Uh,
having me.
Definitely. So thank you for everyone who's been on my channel and listening. Please like and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed it, and you have a good one.